Just over a week to go now before FPL kicks off on Friday, the 15th of August. I've been doing a lot of updating to my current draft. So today I'm going to show you my latest team and a couple of small alternative drafts that I'm highly considering as well. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. And as promised, in today's video, I'm going to be looking through my updated draft ahead of game week 1. Before we look at the draft itself, two quick bits of admin, light admin on chip strategy. Number one is that this draft is currently looking at bench boosting in game week 2, but it's not completely fixed. So if for whatever reason things don't fall my way, I'm honestly perfectly happy to just leave the bench boost for a random game week in the future. I'm aiming to get to 5 free transfers fairly quickly. And of course, we've got 5 free transfers around AFCON as well. So I'm perfectly happy to leave it for a later point. So I don't want to get too obsessed with maximizing the value in my side in the entire 15 for the first few game weeks at the expense of the next few game weeks after that, because I'll have the money spread. So that's number one. Number two is I'm also looking at trying to wildcard as late as possible, ideally in game week 13. That might not come to fruition, but it's a nice aim to have. So a lot of the players that I've picked today are very high on the expected minutes, good injury records, and have good fixtures over a longer period of time, rather than trying to focus on just the first couple of game weeks. With that being said, let's take a look at the starting point for my game week 1 draft. Right then, so as we get started with the draft, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It would massively help me out, and I'm aiming to try and get as close to 5,000 subscribers by the start of the season as possible. So fingers crossed we can get close, and your help would be greatly appreciated. Let's start off with in goal. Looking at the two that I've currently got, I'm trying to maintain a balance of budget. I was thinking about maybe having a 4.5 next to Sanchez, but now that Dubravka is emerging as a potential signing for Burnley, I think it makes sense to maybe try and save some money in that second goalkeeper spot. Dubravka at Burnley would be a keeper I wouldn't really be expecting to play many weeks, but for a bench boost game week 2 strategy, if he does sign for Burnley, that's absolutely perfect, because what it means is that I've got a goalkeeper at home to Sunderland in game week 2. Every other week, I'm not spending any extra money. I'd never start him ever again. But that 1 week, I might have a good chance of a clean sheet. I've got around a 33% chance of a clean sheet in that fixture, according to the current market odds. So if he signs for them, I'm very happy with holding him as my second keeper. Sanchez is very much my first keeper at the moment. I think he's a standout option at 5 million. If you look through some of the projection models, if you look through the data, Chelsea's defence matches up pretty nicely to a lot of the defences in which they have 5.5 million keepers. So you've got Raya at Arsenal, Alisson at Liverpool. You've also got Man City, Ederson as well at 5.5, whereas Sanchez nestles into that bunch in terms of the clean sheet odds and the projections at 0.5 less. The alternative I like the look of is Sells at Nottingham Forest, but I don't really want to double up on the Nottingham Forest defence to begin with. Yes, they've got very good fixtures, and I expect them to be a decent defence again, but considering they performed so far beyond their expected data last season, and their data did regress towards the end of last year, I'm a little bit hesitant to double up at this point in time. And I do want Chelsea coverage, considering they are statistically a very good defence. So right now, I've landed on Sanchez over Sells, but I do also like Sells in isolation. And if I didn't have Williams in my back line, which we'll come on to in a moment, Sells could easily be my keeper of choice. Sanchez marginally beats him in terms of the expected clean sheets in the first 6 or 7, and in terms of the expected points as well. So that's why I'm going with Sanchez, but I don't dislike Sells either. Moving into my back line, Van Dijk is my 6 million representative. He has been for quite a while now, so not too much changing there. And that is mainly because of the combination he offers. Now, not only does he offer the clean sheet potential, which is the best in the league this season in the first 5 or 6 game weeks, but also he's very good on the defensive contributions, or DEFCON for short, and he has some attacking threat. Now, I don't want to over egg the attacking threat. It's not like he's going to score a goal every other week, but he does go out for set pieces, and he is known to get a couple of goals here or there. I think he had about 0.1 XGI per 90 last season, so he's not bad from those set pieces. So in combination, he comes out on top of the 6 million defenders for me. But I like Gvardiol. I like the Arsenal centre-backs as well. I think Van Dijk just shades it at the moment, but there's nothing against those other options. Moving across, since my last draft, I think I've taken quite a lot of money out of defense. I've downgraded my 5.5 million defender to a 5 million defender. And that has gone from, I think it was Milenkovic in my last draft, to Williams. Now, looking really closely at the data, Williams would have actually ran Murillo and Milenkovic very close in terms of the actual output last season. His attacking data is very good for a defender, and he's very good on the CBIT defensive contributions as well. Again, for a left back, he's not as good as some of the centre backs, but for a left back who also offers attacking threat, he's actually very solid. In fact, he's solid enough to really compete with both Murillo and Milenkovic in terms of raw points this season at a cheaper price. So I think he's a standout good option at 5 million. And considering the fixtures Forest do have, I do want some coverage of that Forest defence. I'm a little bit more worried as time goes on as to how they're going to rotate with Europe, but for the first few fixtures, I don't think fatigue is going to be a problem, and Williams looks absolutely nailed into that starting lineup. So very happy to go with him. But it is worth noting that they do have 1 week in which they've got a poor fixture, and that is game week 4 against Arsenal. Now, the clean sheet odds for that fixture are very, very low, not impossible, but ideally, I don't want to have to play him or any Nottingham Forest defender in that week. So that's the reason I've gone for these two 4.5 million defenders at time of recording. Anderson is a standout good option at 4.5 million. I'm absolutely determined that he is the best 4.5 million defender at time of recording. He's incredibly good on the CBIT, those defensive contributions for his price. And Fulham, despite not keeping many clean sheets last season, their defense and their data defensively was deceptively very strong. So I think that Anderson is going to end up being a much better pick than the 4.5 million price tag might suggest. And importantly, in game week 4, he goes up against Leeds at home. So that's a very playable fixture for him. Meanwhile, my next 4.5 million defender, Gahey, which could be Richards, by the way, if Gahey does get a move to Liverpool, for example, not a problem there. Either of them do okay on the defensive contributions, and both of them have a nice fixture, of course, in game week 4 against Sunderland at home. So with that in mind, I can play both of those two players instead of Williams or Esteve, which we'll come on to, and they can start alongside Van Dijk in that particular game week. In the other game weeks, those two defenders, Anderson and Gahey, can rotate a little bit. I generally prefer Anderson to start because he is very good on the defensive contribution numbers, but there might be the odd week in which Gahey comes in. Finally, on my bench, I'll have Esteve, who again, a Burnley asset who I expect to play 90 every single week. And looking at the data from the Championship, I expect him to be very good on the defensive contributions as well. So he's a bit of a floor raiser. I rarely expect to have to play him, but I think it's a good player to have because it will prevent a hit at times when you might have a bit of a crisis in your back line. If you got an injury or two or a suspension, Esteve, although I'm not expecting 6 to 8 points very often, if at all, I am expecting 3 or 4 points fairly regularly. And if you're in a position where you need to take a hit to get a playing defender otherwise, Esteve coming in and getting 3 or 4 points is absolutely fine. And actually, there aren't many defenders, if any, in the entire game in which taking a hit in any given game week will get you an average net gain of 4 points over what Esteve might provide. So let's say he gets 3. Getting 7 points off of any defender is going to be difficult, let alone more than that. It's hard to predict that accurately. So I prefer to just have him as a placeholder. And no, I'm not expecting to play him very often, but he's good for a bench boost game week 2 because he'll have Sunderland at home. And after that, he might help me avoid taking a hit at a later point. Right then, so into my midfield, and Salah and Palmer, I believe, have been in every single one of my drafts so far. They're not really going anywhere. Salah, we've talked about 1,000,001 times. We know his quality. Expected minutes monster. The underlying data is fantastic. He's on penalties. He ticks all of the boxes. And although a drop-off might come at some point this season or in a future season, I don't want to have to take that gamble right now. And I think it's safer to go with the crowd. And I do think he's the best captaincy option in at least 3 or 4 of the opening 6 or 7 game weeks. So for me, he is absolutely nailed into my side. Barring an injury, he's going nowhere. Moving over to Palmer, it's kind of a Salah light in a way. The data's not quite as good, but it is still very positive. He's on penalties. He gets 90 minutes. He's on some set pieces as well. Yes, there was a little dip off at the end of last season, but he showed his value and his worth in the Club World Cup. And importantly, the fixtures for Chelsea are very positive for a pretty decent period of time as well. Now, there is a consideration for someone like a Bukayo Saka instead, but I think Palmer does slightly edge it for me because he's got the guarantee of penalties, whereas Saka, because Gyökeres has signed, I am a bit worried that he loses those penalties. So I think Palmer with a slightly better goal threat than Saka and that guarantee of penalties, I think just slightly edges it, which is why he's in. It's also a little bit of a structural thing. It's nice to have Palmer in there because it's easy to then move down to a Saka or to any other midfielder in the game in just one move too. So moving across to my third midfielder, I've currently got Semenyo in there, but I have to admit, this is the position which I'm toying around with the most. I'm not completely convinced that I'm going to end up on Semenyo, although I do like him and I think he is being overlooked a little bit. I think even at 7 million, he provides good value. He's got good underlying data. He gets 90 minutes a match, almost guaranteed, and he gets shots off at an incredible rate as well for a midfielder. So I think he's due to have another very positive season. Liverpool in game week 1 is not ideal, but I actually wouldn't be planning on playing him in game week 1 as it is. I'd actually be playing Anderson ahead of him, slightly ahead on the expected points in game week 1 at home to Brentford. We'll come on to him in a moment. But after that, Bournemouth's fixtures are actually very positive for a long period of time. And if you'll remember at the start of the video, I said that I'm looking for players who have high expected minutes, good injury records, and I can hold on to with good fixtures so I can postpone the wildcard as long as possible, hopefully all the way through to game week 13. Semenyo does fit that characteristic quite well, so I do like him, although I will go on to discuss a few other alternatives in that position I like because he's far from locked in, and this is the position where if I can find a little bit more money, that's probably where it would go. I'd probably upgrade this position in particular, and we'll show you what I'm thinking there in just a moment's time. Now, moving across to Ndiaye and Anderson, these are two players that have been in almost all of my drafts. Ndiaye, good set of fixtures. He's on penalties. He gets good minutes. The attacking data isn't box office, but at 6.5 million, you're not expecting it to be. And I also, anecdotally, on the eye, I think he's a very good player. And I think he's going to continue to improve as well. So I think Ndiaye is going to be a good option this season. I don't expect him to necessarily be the best 6.5 across the entire season, but with the opening set of fixtures and with the penalties, I think he's a safe bet. And then what you can do after a few game weeks, or at least what I plan on possibly doing, is looking at that position and thinking, okay, which other 6.5 million midfielders have put their hand up and look like the hot picks for this season? And there's no need to take the risk on which one it's going to be to begin with. You can go for the sure thing, and you've got transfers to move across to whichever one ends up being the really cool, the really fun pick after a few game weeks. That could be Rodri, could be Rice, it could be someone we're not expecting. But Ndiaye right now seems like he's got the most boxes ticked, the most guarantees that I feel safest with in game week 1, especially with that opening fixture of Leeds away, of course, as well. Finally, Anderson. A similar logic to Ndiaye. It's a 5.5 million asset that I expect to tick over very nicely. He would normally be first on my bench, but in game week 1, I think he can be played ahead of Semenyo at home to Brentford. He's a CBIT monster. We've talked about it a lot. We'd expect about 15 to 20 matches this season in which he would get those 2 extra points. That is a huge boost, and it puts him up in line with assets that are actually valued around 7 million to 6.5 million this season. So I think he's possibly even a little bit underpriced. I think the reason he's not more popular is because he is very boring. There's nothing exciting about a player who gets 1 attacking return on average every 5 game weeks and will trundle along with 4 pointers, 5 pointers every other week. That's not exciting. But what it does mean, a bit like Esteve, is that in a time of crisis, in a time when I've got an injury in my starting 11 or rotation hits unexpectedly or a suspension, Anderson, in any week, because as we've seen, CBIT does crossover matches, whether or not they're against a difficult opponent or an easy opponent, it crosses over fairly well. You've got a good chance of getting a 4 or a 5 pointer from him in any given game week. So first on my bench, coming off the bench in any week, no matter the fixture, I think there's not much of a safer option at 5.5 than Anderson. There are much more exciting picks, in fact, loads of exciting picks. And one of them, in fact, probably 1 or 2 of them, will probably outperform Anderson this season. But we say this every season, it's about picking the right one. If you don't know for sure which one it's going to be, then why take the risk? And Anderson is anything but a risk. He gets very good minutes. He's on a fair amount of set pieces, might be on even more this season as well with Elanga gone. And he does actually get an attacking return every 5 or 6 game weeks on average as well. If he gets you 4 or 5 points a week in the weeks that you need him, for the time being, I think that's absolutely fine. And then after 8 or 9 game weeks, when we've seen the lay of the land and we've seen which cheap players have put their hands up and said, you know what, this is my season, I'm getting great minutes, the data's looking good, all of those things looked a little bit more locked in, then you can move across from a boring pick like Anderson to someone exciting. Let's say it's a Harry Wilson at Fulham, or maybe an Adingra at Sunderland. But we don't have those guarantees yet. And if you pick them to begin with, it might go really well and you might get ahead of people, but also there's the risk that it goes very badly wrong and you're on the wrong 5.5. With Anderson, I think the risk of it being the wrong 5.5 altogether is very low. And although I don't think he's going to be the best 5.5, I would be relatively confident in saying that he'll be in the top 3 or 4 by the end of the season. And so that is why Anderson is currently there, usually as a 5th midfielder on my bench, first sub. But in game week 1, playing a 3-4-3, I can have him ahead of Semenyo as well. So moving into my forward line, and what I've done since my last draft is moved a little bit of funds away from my defence and redistributed them up front, in particular into one position. And that currently is Ollie Watkins. I'm very keen to have a 9 million asset covered off, whether that is in midfield or up front, just so I can move around a little bit more flexibly. One limitation of this draft, which I'll come on to in a minute, is that I've not got a 9 million slot for a midfielder, but equally, it has meant that I do have a 9 million slot up front. I have currently gone with Ollie Watkins because I think he's just that slight touch more guaranteed for the start of the season than a Gyökeres, but Gyökeres could easily be there in place of him if you preferred him. Watkins probably doesn't have penalties, but there's a possibility he might start taking them again. Even without them, the data is very positive, and over several seasons now, he's ran at about a goal every other game, so he's a player that will consistently keep churning out FPL returns for you, and Villa's opening few fixtures are enticing enough that I do want some Villa coverage. Now, I could go with Rodgers instead of Semenyo, but I think I marginally prefer Watkins if I can. And importantly, what Watkins gives me is that safety net of minutes to begin with. Even with Guessand, I think you pronounce it, signing, I'm still very confident in Watkins' minutes, at least to begin with. And then after a few weeks, when Gyökeres is a little bit safer as a pick for Arsenal, then I can move over to him very comfortably, especially when Arsenal's fixtures turn very positive after, I think it's 5 or 6 game weeks. To begin with, though, Watkins seems maybe like the safer pick, who also will tick over very nicely with points. Moving across, I've still got Dominic Solanke in my draft. I think he's been in everyone so far as well, but he's not a completely secure pick. He's obviously had his injury doubts over pre-season, and if he's in any way a risk going into game week 1, I've got my eyes on either Chris Wood at Forest or Jean-Philippe Mateta at Crystal Palace. Now, the reason I like Chris Wood is because his opening fixtures are very good. The expected minutes aren't bad, and he's on penalties, of course. But I think if Solanke's fit, I do marginally prefer Solanke, who I also expect to be on penalties now Son is gone, by the way. However, the one that has entered my thinking recently is Jean-Philippe Mateta. And the reason for that is that he's very low owned at the moment. He might have some penalty share as well, especially if Eberechi Eze leaves the club and goes to Arsenal over the summer, in which case Mateta might actually be the pick of the 7.5s. And then finally, Nketiah, there's a significant injury rumour coming around this morning, which suggests he might be out for 2 months. If that's the case, Mateta's expected minutes should go up considerably, and he probably overtakes Solanke and Chris Wood in my thoughts. So I am still looking at him, but I think it's important to have that 7.5 million striker covered, because there are lots of good options which might end up being the best of the lot. So João Pedro, for instance, as well, could end up being the best one. So I think it's nice to have that 7.5 million price point covered, so you can get across in just one move pretty easily. Now, finally, I've got Strand Larsen as my 6.5 million forward. I've come down on the side of Strand Larsen over Danny Welbeck. I think the upside's there with Strand Larsen. Even without penalties last season, he got 14 goals and I think a handful of assists as well when he wasn't the talismanic figure at Wolves. Now, with Cunha gone, he should take that step up. They have replaced Cunha fairly well with Arias too, so I don't think the creativity is going to be lacking in that Wolves 11 too much either. So I think Strand Larsen is due to have a really good season at 6.5 million. He'll get the penalties. I think the data will go up as a result of that. The minutes should go up as a result of that as well, in terms of Cunha going, of course. And I think at 6.5 million, he's just a shade undervalued. I think at 7 million, it probably would have been a fair price. But at 6.5, I think he is just slightly underpriced. And I think it's an opportunity to seize. I don't mind Danny Welbeck, but he's only ever scored 10 goals in the Premier League in any given season, and his injury record isn't the best. And again, because I'm looking at wildcarding late, I want players that I feel a little bit more secure on their injury track record and their long-term fixtures. And Wolves, once that game week 1 fixture against Man City is out of the way, they've got a great run all the way through to the time in which I'm looking to wildcard. So Strand Larsen is in for me at the moment, but he's by no means a lock in my side, because if I was to save a little bit of money, he's one of the options which I could downgrade to maybe upgrade elsewhere. So before we move on, I think it's important to note some of the drawbacks on this draft before looking at maybe a couple of the alternatives that I'm currently considering. So the first drawback that you might have already noticed, I don't currently have any Man City, any Arsenal or any Newcastle. 3 very good sides with great attacks in particular, and Arsenal as well, an exceptional defence. Arsenal's opening fixtures aren't the best, but I'm still maybe a little bit worried about not owning an Arsenal defender. They could do very well, but I think the structure breaks apart a little bit if I add another million to a Williams and upgrade that to a Gabriel, for instance. Declan Rice in the midfield could be a nice way to own some Arsenal instead of an Ndiaye, or maybe even a Semenyo as well. But I think taking the penalties in Ndiaye is probably the way to go right now. And then up front, that Watkins slot could be Gyökeres as well. I'm not as keen on Saka because I think Palmer slightly edges him to begin with. But Gyökeres and Watkins is a very close call. So I could end up with Gyökeres there. In terms of Man City, I think Haaland just takes up so much of the goal share that if you're going to go with a Man City forward, he's probably the best way to go. And because he's so expensive, it does break apart my draft a little bit to try and squeeze him in. And I think that Watkins, Solanke and Strand Larsen will tick over consistently enough that they won't be a million miles away from Haaland's output. They'll obviously be below it, but I'm not expecting them to be 5 million below for Watkins, or I think it's 6.5 million below for Solanke, and so on and so forth. So I think value-wise, these 3 forwards are doing it for me right now. Marmoush in the midfield, 8.5 million, I really like the look of. And again, I think that's a real limitation with this draft, where yes, I've got Palmer and Salah, but then it's a bit of a drop-off down to Semenyo at 7 million. It makes it quite hard for me to get to a Bruno Fernandes at 9 million, or a Wirtz at 8.5, or again a Marmoush at 8.5. All 3 options which I think do have the potential to do very, very well, even at the start of the season. So I am considering maybe downgrading one of my forward spots. Maybe that is Watkins to a 7.5 to just give me that little bit more money to spend in that midfielder 3, and therefore have like a Florian Wirtz or a Marmoush to begin with, and an easy hop across to Bruno Fernandes ahead of Burnley at home in game week 3. And then he's also got Sunderland at home in game week 7. So I am conscious that a player of his quality, I need to have a route to him and a worst case scenario planned. Right now with this draft, maybe that's quite difficult to do. So I'm a little bit worried there. Now, the other limitation is the lack of a 5.5 million defender. I think there are some really good options, especially Daniel Munoz. I really like the look of. However, with this structure, all I need to do is find 0.5. It's not a nightmare to do it. Yes, it would take an extra free transfer to do so, but I can get to a Munoz, or I can get to another 5.5 like a Tarkowski if they end up being the pick with 2 moves and only 0.5 like moved around or shuffled from one position to another. So I don't think it's a nightmare, although that is possibly another limitation. Now, the other thing that I am considering is there is a lot of money in the forward line now. Obviously, that's a 3 striker setup. So one option I could use there is downgrading Strand Larsen to a Mark Yu at Sunderland. 4.5 probably will be a starter eventually, although maybe not to begin with. And then I can use that extra 2 million to bolster maybe Semenyo in my midfield, and it could go all the way up to a Wirtz or even a Bruno Fernandes. Or I could chuck some of that money into my defence and upgrade a 4.5 million option to a 5.5 million option, for instance. So those are the limitations, but let me know what you think of this draft. And before we finish up the video, I'm going to take a quick look at a couple of changes I'd make to it that you might feel is a better way of structuring it. So alternative number one would involve two swaps. Number one would be to move out Ollie Watkins and bring in Victor Gyökeres. So not too difficult to do that, both 9 million forwards. And this would be under the proviso that I'm very confident that Gyökeres starts in game week 1 and gets very good minutes from the get-go. Now, I'm sure that he's going to end up being Arsenal's number 9 and a very, very good FPL pick, but I'm less confident at time of recording that he definitely gets good minutes in game week 1. And if he doesn't, then he's not really someone that I can pick at that price point for game week 1, especially when Ollie Watkins is sat right there and has that guarantee. But Gyökeres, I think, has a really good chance of taking penalties off of Saka. Obviously, no guarantees, but considering his record and considering he is coming in as a record signing centre forward, I think he is probably going to take them eventually. If I think that happens straight away and I think the minutes are good, he can come in for Ollie Watkins, but I still want a bit of Villa coverage. So what I've done is taken out Semenyo, who, as I've already talked about, was less secure in my 11, in my 15, and brought in Morgan Rogers, who's very good on the expected minutes, great injury record, and not bad on the underlying attacking data. Meanwhile, it gives me that Villa coverage as well. Although he doesn't cover Ollie Watkins, I hate that term, his data is good enough that I'd expect him to tick along nicely for the first few game weeks, given those fixtures. So I think as a combination, this could be a nice alternative to Ollie Watkins with a Semenyo. But let me know if you prefer this duo, that being Gyökeres and Rogers, or the Semenyo-Watkins route to begin with. And let's move over to the other alternative. So the other alternative is moving two different positions around. One of them is still Semenyo, but the other one would be my third centre forward. Strand Larsen would be downgraded to a 6 million forward. Now, Thiago, I'm very reluctant to start recommending at the moment because I know he's appeared in the last few days because reviewers launched and he's obviously a bit of an expected data darling. But it is important to note that if Yoane Wissa goes and leaves Brentford, Thiago is probably left as the centre forward for Brentford. And at 6 million, considering his underlying data from Club Brugge before he signed for Brentford, he could be a bit of a bargain who might also take penalties. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on. I wouldn't become obsessed with including him just yet because Wissa has been spotted in training for Brentford and could easily still start the season for them. But if Wissa goes or digs his heels in and refuses to play, Thiago's expected minutes probably do end up being pretty decent, and the chances of penalties also end up being pretty decent. So at 6 million, I think that's a downgrade I'd be willing to make in order to upgrade someone like Semenyo up by just 0.5 million to Eberechi Eze. Now, again, this would be on the proviso that Eze isn't moving to Arsenal, that he's secure at Palace. So questions still need to be answered there. But I really like Eze. He's got good penalty share at Palace. He takes a lot of them. He's got great underlying data for a midfielder, especially that goal threat. And again, at 7.5 million, I think he's really good standout value for money at that price point. I think the expected output for someone at 7.5 million should be a touch lower than what I'd expect from Eze. And given his importance to Palace, the fact he's on penalties, set pieces, great underlying data, all of that coming together, I think that might outweigh the fact that Palace's fixtures aren't the best to begin with. And with all of that in mind, I'd be very happy to make this swap if Wissa does indeed leave Brentford and then Thiago becomes a bit more secure. Anyway, we've reached the end of today's video, so I'd massively appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel to help me get to 5,000 before the start of the FPL season. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, but obviously let me know what you think of the draft in the comments below. It's not locked in yet. I'll be doing another draft or two before we lock in for game week 1. And of course, hit that notification bell before you leave so you don't miss out on any future content. But in the meantime, good luck with your drafting, and I'll see you next time as we start locking in our sides ahead of game week 1.